Welcome to this painting tutorial. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this video. In this video I will show you how I painted this Slaughterpriest from Age of Sigmar. This one's a fairly straightforward model to paint. The only part where you have to be careful is painting those muscles, since the sculpting can be very intricate and taking care to paint each one, paying attention to the creases, and shadows will take a big part of how this model turns out at the end. I really hope you like this video. Please like it, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you like it, and I will start. I'm going to start by priming the model in gray with Vallejo Surface Primer Gray through an airbrush. You can use any color that you like. I prefer gray and start with a neutral tone, since we're going to be painting a lot of skin and stuff like that, so it's going to be easier to cover over gray than black, but you can start with whatever color you like. I'm going to start by painting the blacks, and for that I'm going to use Vallejo model color black. This is because the innermost part of the pants and armor is going to be black, so I need to start with this color because it's going to be harder to reach afterwards. And also you can paint all of the places that are going to be silver with this color because it's easier to cover silver over black than white or gray, so you can do that, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. Next, I'm going to paint the skin with Bugman's Glow, and with this color I'm going to paint all of the skin, and it's mostly the upper torso, and you don't have to be very careful to paint only the skin. You can paint other stuff if you want. You don't have to be very careful, but make sure to use thin down paint so you don't end up covering a lot of detail. I think I did use this color twice. Just apply one layer, let it dry, and apply a second one. And that's it. Once that's done, I decided to move on to the leather. For that I used Mournfang brown. And if you notice, I'm picking up the places that are harder to reach first, the deepest, most details that are going to be covered by other stuff on top of it. And that's the way to go for most models. And just make sure to thin down this color and paint all these little straps of leather with this color. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to paint the cloth, and for that I'm going to use Skaven Blight Dinge. This is a very warm gray color and it looks pretty good. I'm going to switch on to a larger brush to paint those larger areas. For most of the stuff in this model you can get away with painting with a fine detail brush, but in some larger areas like this in the skin you could use a larger base coating brush if you want. Next, I'm going to start picking up the silvers, and for that I'm going to use Leadbelcher. I'm going to apply this with mostly a fine detail brush, but you can use a larger brush on the Blade and Morning Star if you like. But most of the details around the model are very small, and you have to be very careful not to paint over places that you've already painted. So you have to be a little bit careful and make sure to thin all of your colors again, and especially the metallics, but not too much. Because if you thin it too much, the metallic flakes start running all over the model. Next, I'm going to start painting the red. For that, I'm going to use Mephiston red. You can use Khorne red if you want. That'll produce a more magenta, more kind of a red-violet kind of color. And it looks good on Age of Sigmar. This one, I painted a little bit more to look like my World Eaters. That's why I went with Mephiston red. Again, it's not that many areas that need this color, it's just the armor in the feet, the shoulder pad, and the helm. Once that's done, I'm going to start painting the bone. For that I'm going to use Zandri Dust, and there's also a little strap of leather behind the armor on the feet that I'm going to paint this color too, and a little pouch on his belt, but mostly just the bone areas. You can pick those out with this color. Next, I'm going to paint the brass, and for that I'm going to use the Baltazar Gold as always, and I'm going to make sure to thin down this color and use mostly a fine detail brush to get all those edges on the armor. And I just forgot that, I just noticed that I didn't tell you that I painted the horns with Skaven Blight Dinge as well at that same step. So if you have any doubts on that, I used Skaven Blight Dinge. Here I'm just trying to pick all these gold areas with this color very carefully, not to paint on any other parts that I already painted. And it's mostly gonna be with just one small detail brush. And I think these are all the base coats that we need to start shading and then highlighting. Now that we have all of our colors covered, I'm going to start shading this model, and for that I'm going to start with Reikland Fleshshade. And this color I'm going to use over all of the skin of this model. And I'm going to use it a little bit heavy, but don't use it too heavy so that it doesn't create any pools or it doesn't gather on the underside of his waist. And make sure to shake well this color pot before using it, because if it's not mixed properly, it can end up looking glossy or it can frost. Once it's done, I'm going to start shading the rest of the model with Agrax Earthshade. And with this color, just make sure to cover most of the areas of the bone and most of the metallics and most of the gold, but in the red parts. I'm going to try and only get the shade on the crevices so that I don't have to do a lot of cleanup later on. But yeah, just try to get all of the areas that are brown, silver, gray, and bone. And the reds, just try to be a little bit more careful with it. Once it's done, and once the shade on the skin has dried, I'm going to use Druchii Violet. And with this color, I'm going to shade over all of the bruises. And I'm also going to completely cover his left hand. This looks kind of demonic. It has like a maw in the underside and some teeth and stuff like that. And we need it to look a little bit like corrupted. And this is the color that I'm going to use to shade it all the way up to the elbow on the back. I think I went over it twice. I let it dry and I applied a second one. But you can get away with just using one coat. It depends how subtle the effect you want to look. I think 2 is the best. Once it's done, you can leave it like this. This is a very nice tabletop standard model if you look at it. But I'm going to highlight all of the colors of this model, and I'm going to start with the skin with Cadian flesh tone. And with this color, I'm going to try to paint all of the muscles and all of the skin area, leaving all of the recesses behind, just trying to avoid all of those shadows, and very carefully picking muscle by muscle. Take your time and use thin paint so it doesn't end up covering a lot of detail, and it's gonna look very good at the end. On the demonic hand, I'm not covering over the skin. I'm just picking the very sharpest edges and giving them an edge highlight as carefully as I can. I hope you can see the demonic hand. It only has edge highlighting with Cadian flesh tone at this point. And next I'm going to use Kislev flesh, and with this color I'm going to start highlighting all of the muscles. I'm going to pick up most of the upper parts of the muscles, but still picking like 50% of the area and leaving a little bit of the Cadian and the shadow colors behind. And make sure to have thin paint, that's going to help a lot with the transition. And that's it. Just do the same as we did before. Just pick up every muscle one by one and start highlighting little by little, focusing on the upper parts where the light would hit. And on the demonic hand, just pick up the sharpest edges with this color. And to finish off the skin, I'm going to use Flayed Flesh. This, with a fine detail brush, I'm going to just pick up the sharpest edges on the muscles. Wherever you see a hard edge, you can use Flayed Flesh to just give it an extra highlight, and focus on the parts on the very top where the light would hit on the very top of the muscles. If you don't see a clear edge, you can just draw a line on the upper part of those muscles, and that's it. Once it's done, I'm going to start highlighting the blacks. For that, I'm going to use a Dark Reaper, and with this color I'm going to edge highlight all of those edges on the boots, on the black leather parts of the model. If you chose any other ones, you can use this color too. Once it's done, I'm going to use Fenrisian Grey, and I'm going to give a second highlight to the blacks. And this just focused on the sharpest edges of the black, or the places that you think would catch a little bit more light. And this is going to produce a very bluish black that is going to make a good contrast with the very warm colors on the other parts of this model. Just be very careful to leave a little bit of the other color behind and do as thin as highlight as you can. Next, I'm going to use Skrag Brown, and with this, I'm going to do the same thing, but with the brown this time. I'm going to edge highlight all of those edges with Skrag Brown and a fine detail brush. Just make sure to try to keep the lines as thin as you can. If you can't, that's fine, because we're going to use a second edge highlight after this. The next color I'm going to use is Balor Brown, and this is going to be an extreme highlight on the browns, just in the very sharpest edges of it. And try to leave a little bit of the Skrag Brown and the other brown behind, so that you create a little transition of color. Next, I'm going to move on to the grays. For that, I'm going to use Stormvermin Fur, and with this color I'm going to pick up the sharpest edges of the horns on the helmet, and on the cloth I'm going to just pick up the raised folds. And it's the majority of the cloth, just leaving the crevices on the previous color. And try to apply thin coats. It's not going to cover very well the first time. That's fine if it looks patchy. Leave it like that. Let it dry, and then come back and give more coats until you have the desired opacity. Once that's done, I wanted to go over it with a very bright gray. So I used Ulthuan Gray. And this is going to go on the sharpest edges of the bone on the helmet, and on the grays on the cloth. Just pick up the sharpest edges, all of the edges. I mean, it's just a very thin edge highlight on the cloth and on all of the holes and little details like that on the bottom part of those. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to the silvers, and for that I'm going to start with a little bit of rust with Ryza Rust. I'm going to dry brush this color onto the plain parts of the blade that I want to look older, and it doesn't have to go all over it, and it doesn't have to only cover the edges. If you only cover the edges, once you start highlighting, the effect is going to be lost. So make sure to try and get a little bit of this color on the flat parts of the blade as well, and all of the places that you think would accumulate rust. Once that's done, I'm going to use Runefang Steel, and I'm going to dry brush this into all of the metallic silver areas. You don't have to be very clean on this part. If you overdo it, it's going to look like it's scratched and weathered. But if you use too much, you might lose all of those rust areas that we did before. So make a conscious effort to keep it light, and just pick all of those edges and try to leave some of the rust color behind. Once it's done, I'm going to use Stormhost Silver. This is an extra silver step. This is just to pick up all of those sharpest edges that you really want to look very bright, and this is a more selective edge highlight on the sharpest edges, just to make a little bit brighter those tones, and to be a little bit more consistent, because the dry brushing can be a little fussy and not that strong in some areas. Next, I'm going to move on to the reds, and for that I'm going to use Wild Rider Red. And with this color, I'm going to edge highlight all of the places that are going to be red. Make sure to pick up those spikes on the armor, and make as thin as a highlight as you can. And that's it. Once it's done, I'm going to use Fire Dragon Bright. This is a very bright orange color, and this is going to give a very fiery glow to all those red areas and make it pop even more. So we're going to use this color on the sharpest edges of the red, and just make sure to make a little bit thinner highlight and only on the most sharpest places of the red, and leave a little bit of the other colors behind, so it looks like a transition of color that is going to bring up those reds and make them pop. Once we're done with those reds, I'm going to move on to the brass, and for that I'm going to use bright bronze from Game Color. This is going to be used as an edge highlight on all of the brass areas of this model, and just avoid the flat areas, and try to pick all of the edges of the symbols and trimming on the armor, and that's it. All of the paints on this model I thinned down with just water. I didn't use any mediums, but you can feel free to use Lamian medium or drying retarders or any sort of material that will help you with thinning down your paints and work a little bit better with your colors. Once that's done, I'm going to start picking up the bone areas of this model with Zandri dust again. This is just a cleanup. I'm going to pick most of the bigger, flatter parts on the bone and bringing up this color again and leaving the shade on the recesses and crevices, and just try to make it easier for the lighter colors to cover over the bone after. After that, I'm using Ushabti bone, and with this color I'm going to cover most of the areas of the bone, just leaving a little bit of the other colors behind and covering about 50% of the upper parts towards the light source, which would be upwards, and just leaving a little bit of the Zandri dust behind. And this is the same way we highlighted the skin. Try to concentrate on all of the edges and all of the places that are facing up. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to painting the bone with Screaming Skull, and this is going to be an edge highlight. I'm going to try to pick up all of the edges on the bone areas, and the little bone spikes on the demonic hand, you can just pick up the very tips of him. And yeah, that's it. Just try to pick up most of the sharpest edges on these areas, and this is going to look as a very extreme edge highlight that is going to make them pop very well. To finish up this model, I'm going to use Blood for the Blood God, and why shouldn't I? I'm going to flick a little bit of this color on the blade, as much or as little as you want. I'm just going to use a little bit on the tip and a little bit on the bottom part of the Morning Star, just to make it look like it clubbed somebody on the head or something. And that's it. Just try to flick this color as if you were like sort of dry brushing in one direction wherever the blow hit on the weapon, and that's it. And this is the finished model. I have to say I had a lot of fun painting this model. It looks pretty freaking good, and I was meaning to paint this model for a long time. I just don't play Age of Sigmar, but I had this model from a White Dwarf magazine and I liked it a lot. It's one of my favorite models so far, I think, and I just wanted to paint it. So I hope you enjoyed this little guide on how to paint this Slaughterpriest. If you like this video, please like it, comment, and subscribe. Leave any comments that you have on the comment section below, and any questions, of course. Let me know what you would like me to paint next. I consider what my fans want me to paint and add it to my list and try to do what people want me to do. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next video. You stayed. Great. Thank you very much for supporting my channel, and if you would like to become a patron, there is a link to my Patreon page in the description below. Your contributions help pay for my work and keeps the channel going. A $1 a month is more than enough, and you can cancel at any time. If you can't, don't worry, you can support my channel by simply watching my videos and sharing them with your friends. Thank you for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.